Hey friends and book lovers, welcome. Today's video is my April wrap up. I almost said May, but it is definitely the April wrap up. So in this month, I read 6 books. I think they were all fantasy, and 2 of them were YA and 4 of them were adult fantasy, which is really exciting, so meeting some goals there. And all of them except 1 book were all from series, and then 1 of them is a standalone fantasy novel. I mean, when you read fantasy, it's very hard to get away from reading a series because that's pretty much how fantasy works. There's a lot of world building, there's a lot of foundation to set, and so you need a series in order to set all that foundation down. Otherwise, books end up being like 2,000 pages long, which is just really not feasible for 1 book. Therefore, you're gonna see a ton of series on this channel when it comes to my fantasy reads, which I don't hate, and hopefully if y'all love fantasy, you don't hate it either. So let's get into what I read in the month of April. All right, so the first book that I finished was kind of a carryover from March, but I ended up reading the majority of it in April, and that is the Starlight C by Erin Morgenstern. This is not exactly my first Erin Morgenstern novel. I did read the majority of The Night Circus and then I put it down. I think I soft DNF'd it. I didn't actually mean to DNF it. I was enjoying the novel, so there was no reason for me to put it down. I think it was one of those things where like life just got busy and I wasn't able to read as much as I wanted to, so that's one novel that I wanted to pick up again. However, I did read the Starlight C, which came out more recently than The Night Circus. I've heard that Erin Morgenstern only publishes like 1 book a decade, which is way too long, but thankfully they're standalones, so we don't have to wait 10 years for the next in a series, which I am thankful for. And this book is like dreaming. How do I describe it? This book is like describing a dream to someone. There are so many different pieces of that dream and you're not really sure how it all ties together, but it's like a dream world version of Alice in Wonderland, but way more convoluted than that. There's like a whole maze and everything. It is very complex, very dreamlike, very difficult to grasp. Like you wanna try to explain it, but it kind of feels like a dream where you're not really able to explain it. And even though it made sense when you were dreaming it, it doesn't make sense when you say it out loud. So you have to read the book to experience it, but I think if you kind of like those dreamy, whimsical, very atmospheric type books where you don't really know 100% what's going on until the end, but it's still very compelling and very beautifully written, then I think that this one might be for you. It is something that you have to read little by little. This is not something that I could have binge read, which is why it took me a long time to finish. I was reading like 50 to 70 pages a day, and sometimes more than 70 pages felt like a lot. And mind you, this is like a 500-page novel, so it will take you a while to get through it. Kate at the Literary Apothecary did say that this was like a fine wine, and she said that it is best to take it slow, and she was right. This book also has these like little fables interspersed within the main story that do tie into the full story of the book and the world, and those fables are so good. One of my favorites is the Sun and the Moon story. I feel like I could reread that story just by itself over and over again because it was just so beautiful, and I felt like I was always looking for parallels with that story within the book because I just thought it was so beautiful. It was so simple, but it was so whimsical and heartbreaking, and I loved it. While I really did enjoy this, I think I only gave it a 4 stars, which I know folks that have read this that love this writing give it a 5 stars, but for me, this isn't necessarily the style of book that I absolutely love, so it's hard for me to give it a 5 stars, even though it was a really, really well-written, beautiful story and very compelling. So I gave it a 4 stars because it's not my personal preference, but I do love her writing and I will read more of her books. I think The Night Circus, which is another one of her books, is a little bit more straightforward in the story and the plotline and the characters. So I got attached to that storyline and characters much more deeply, even though I haven't finished it. But that was because of life and not because of the book itself. So I do recommend reading this if you like the way that I described it, if you like all those things in a book, and if you like Erin Morgenstern's writing. It is a really beautiful novel, but beware, it might take you longer than usual to read, especially if you're a fast reader. The next one that I read is part of a duology, and this is a young adult duology, super popular here on BookTube, and that is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. The Shadow and Bone series on Netflix just came out, and it follows these characters in the Six of Crows books, but like the prequel version of them, I guess. So I wanted to have at least met them in the book format before I dove into the show, which I haven't even started watching the Shadow and Bone show yet because I want to finish Crooked Kingdom before I do so, and I haven't yet finished that one. It is sitting over there, which is why I keep looking over at it, and my lovely boyfriend ended up buying me the hardcovers to this, which I really want those like fancy dust jackets for these ones because there are some beautiful dust jackets out there for the Six of Crows duology, so I need to get those. But I really did enjoy this book. I think I gave it like a 4 stars. It's a really fun, compelling novel, and even though there's not a ton of magic in it, like in the Shadow and Bone series, it's more focused on the heist and the characters themselves and the magic in the world. It was still interesting and it was still compelling, and it was definitely still fiction and fantastical. There are people on BookTube that die for this book, that have cried over this book. I'm not one of those. I really expected tears for some reason, but I didn't get any. However, I have heard from other people, other lovers of this duology, that Crooked Kingdom is like really where it's at with like the emotional roller coaster and the heartbreaking story. So I'm expecting tears for that one at least. Either way, this was a really fun book, and it's a really fun installment in the world, in the Grishaverse. I'm excited to read the sequel, Crooked Kingdom, because this one kind of does leave you off on a little bit of a cliffhanger, and it's killing me not to know what's happened next in the story, but again, there are just too many books and too little time. The next one that I read was The Ninth Reign by Jen Williams. This is the first book in the Winnowing Flame trilogy and was recently made pretty popular by both Elliot Brooks and Patrick Leo. I originally found this from Patrick Leo, and I decided that I wanted to read it because it sounded so compelling, and oh my gosh, I loved it. I've been warring with myself to give it either a 5 or a 4.5. I think I amended my review to a 5-star because it's just really, really good, even though the first novel in a series isn't usually my favorite because it's a lot of foundation setting, it's a lot of learning about the world, getting everything straight. It's still so good, and honestly, I think I pretty much binge read this. This was not a novel that I thought I was gonna binge read, but as soon as I got to the second half where everything started moving a lot faster, it was so interesting. I know that some folks have said that it takes them a while to get into this, and that might happen, but I think it's only like 4 chapters, so not that long. I also did a review on this, so I will link that up in the cards. You guys can check it out if you're interested in a non-spoiler review, and I do give my thoughts there pretty deeply. Joanna and I also did a live show for this May 8th, which was yesterday if you're watching this on May 9th, so check that out if you didn't get a chance to watch it. I think we're gonna start spoiler free and then also do spoilers towards the end of it for those of you that did end up reading it with us. We are reading the sequel in the month of May, so if you've read Ninth Reign and you want to join us for that, you should definitely DM me and I can add you to that group. So very exciting times. This is really, really good. Highly recommend. Please go watch my review video, and I hope that you enjoy this if it's on your radar. If you've read this and we haven't spoken, let me know how you enjoyed it. I really want to hear other people's opinions and how they enjoyed it or didn't enjoy it or whatever they felt about this book in particular. The next book I read, I ended up reading this like half on audio and then half physically because I started it physically, and then my boyfriend and I took kind of a little road trip to see my family, and we ended up reading this book together in the car, so I ended up finishing it physically but also by audio. A little confusing, but I read it both ways, and that was Homeland by R.A. Salvatore, which is the first in the Legends of Drizzt world, and I think he has like a bunch of trilogies that go into this world, and this is the first of those trilogies that have to do with Drizzt. I have to say, I wasn't really sure going into this one what I was gonna think. This is my boyfriend's like favorite trilogy, favorite like author, favorite books, and I wanted to read them because I know how much he loves them and he knows how much I love to read, so it's like the perfect thing. But of course, when like a loved one gives you a book to read and you're not like so sure about it, it's a little bit daunting. However, I, within the first few chapters, knew that I loved R.A. Salvatore's writing. I just really liked his writing style. It was really compelling. And for me, that's kind of all it takes to know that I'll probably like the story. It's very rare that I like an author's writing but don't like their story, because generally good writing usually equals good storytelling, which is probably a good discussion, but that's what I found, at least for my preference. And this was definitely a really good story and really good writing. I really enjoyed it. I want to read the rest of the trilogy. I have the other 2 books because he did buy them for me, and I know that you can find the audiobooks for free on like YouTube, but Audible has them as well. I think I gave this like a 3.5 or 4 stars. It was really, really good. It did feel like an older fantasy book though. It had some of those older fantasy tropes, but it was still a really good book, and it was set in a really dark world, and it's very different from the modern fantasy that's coming out because it is more of a dark fantasy, or it might just be that I'm not as aware or familiar with dark fantasy because I'm still getting into that genre. I really did enjoy it. I really enjoyed the darkness of the novel. I think dark fantasy is something that I need to get more into, and this was a great kind of intro into immersive dark fantasy. So if you guys have read this, let me know. I know that there are a couple of you that have read it and were telling me how much you enjoyed it. So if you have read it, let me know because I want to read the next 2 books, and I'd love to hear from other people if they enjoyed the next 2 in the trilogy as well. The next book that I finished was actually a YA fantasy romance novel, and that was Awakens by Elise Kova. Now this is a quartet series, and Elise Kova is a indie fantasy romance author. She's actually like pretty well known, I feel, in the booktube community, especially if you read fantasy and fantasy romance. She has written a few books that have gone pretty popular and have been in book boxes. I Deal with the Elf King is one of those. That's one that I'm going to be reading, I think, in June, so I'm really excited about that one. But this was one of her more, I think, older YA fantasies, and it was good. It was definitely tropey in the beginning and definitely tropey just throughout the book. I still found it really compelling, and it's definitely one of those books that you can like just easily binge read if you like the tropes and if you kind of like the fantasy romance. It was very innocent. It's not very smutty, but it was still really cute and angsty and intriguing, and I definitely want to continue and finish the series because I did enjoy it. I did give it a 3.5 stars because some of the parts did feel a little bit tropey and nothing was super new or inventive, and so I didn't feel like it stood out from other books, but I still found it fun and interesting to read. Definitely think it's good for like a YA young adult reader, and even an adult reader if you like that and you just kind of want to like sink your teeth into something fun and light and fluffy. And this is definitely one of those books, and I think it's gonna be one of those series. So I'm excited to read the next book. I think the next book might be a little dark by the way the last one is setting it up for, but we will see. And it is always really fun to support self-published authors, so I was really excited that I was able to read that and kind of get my feet wet with some more self-published authors. So the last book that I read for the month of April, I was so excited because it was also a new release, also fantasy romance, and a series that I started earlier this year and I really, really fell in love with. A good friend of mine, Kristen, we read this together, we read the series together, and we were so excited with this book, which is The Crown of Gilded Bones by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This book starts off so strong, and then you get to 20% and it gets into this like really long lull, and then you get to like 65-68% and it starts picking up again and it finishes really strong, but it was still kind of disappointing. I think I gave it like a 3 or a 3.5 stars just because so much of the middle of it was filler. I felt like one of the main characters lost himself within the romance and just wasn't even a full character. He was just completely worried about his partner the whole time instead of being interested in the rest of the plot, I guess. So I didn't really like that, and there was just a bunch of things that I really didn't enjoy. I did a vlog on it, and I did like a little final thoughts mini review at the end of that vlog, so I'll link that up here if you guys want to see my vlog for The Crown of Gilded Bones. But overall, kind of disappointing, and I'm surprised at that because I was really excited the way the first 2 went and the way that I loved the second book in this series. Oh my gosh, I thought that the third book was going to deliver something amazing just like in the second book. The parts that should have been fleshed out were really quick, and the parts that were really fleshed out, I'm not sure why they were. So hopefully the 4th book that comes out next year in this series is better with the pacing and better with what needs to be fleshed out, and I hope that the romance ups its game because the romance completely fizzled out for me and it was kind of weird instead of being enticing and sexy. Let us hope that the next one that comes out is much better. I'm still going to continue on with the series, but I'm not as excited about it as I was after finishing the second one, unfortunately. I know some folks have read this book, so if you read it, let me know how you feel about it. There was a few of us that read it on the Shelf Space Discord for an unofficial buddy read, and I read this as well with my friend Kristen, and I feel like those that I have spoken to have very similar thoughts to me and have come to kind of the same conclusion. There are some people that are even not continuing on with the series, but I still have faith and I still want to continue on with this series. So let me know if you read it and what you think of it so far. All right, y'all, so that is it for all the books I read in April. There was only 6 of them, which is really not a bad number, but for me, I feel like I've been reading a lot more lately, and I was hoping that I read more in April. Hopefully in May, I can increase the number and read more than 6 books, but we will see. Stay tuned for that wrap up, which will probably come sometime in June. If you like this video, please click the like button. That does help me out a lot. And if you enjoyed this content and you want to see more content from me, please don't hesitate to subscribe.